Welcome, everybody, to this panel session. And our Ukrainian panelists were pointing out that, perhaps surprisingly, this is the only session dedicated, apart from the special address by President Zelensky, is the only session dedicated to Ukraine. So I think Bloomberg is glad to be hosting it. I'm Stephanie Flanders, Head of Economics and Government. We have a lot to cover. I will quickly just introduce the panelists, and then we will get on with it. Starting from my left, Roberta Metsola, President of the European Parliament, Edgar Rinkevich, President of Latvia, Yulia Svidenko, First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Economy for Ukraine, and next to her, Andrei Sybiha, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Ukraine, Jean-Noël Barrot, the French Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, and Radek Sikorski, Foreign Minister for Poland. The way ahead for Ukraine is the title. The incoming president, who has been such a presence here without being present, had a post, I think early this morning or late last night, on this subject. Let's get this war, which never would have started if I were president, over with. We can do it the easy way or the hard way, and the easy way is always better. It's time to make a deal. If we don't make a deal, and soon, I have no other choice than to put high levels of taxes, tariffs, and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States. Minister Andrei Sybiha, is that the way forward?
See, we welcome such strong messages from the President Trump. Hello to everybody. Good morning. So it was really strong message and strong signal. We need to increase pressure on Russia and to force Russia to negotiate. We need USA leadership. We need more engagement of USA. That's the one point. Another point, we need to raise the price for Russia for further aggression. We need to weaken Russia, for example, by strong sanction policy. And the third point, to strengthen Ukraine. We need this deterrence package to stabilize situation, firstly, as a battlefield, to strengthen our military defense capacities, and we are ready to do our homework. So we do really welcome such strong messages from the President Trump, and we believe that he will be the winner, and we believe that we have an additional chance to get new dynamic in diplomatic efforts to end this war and to achieve long-lasting, just and comprehensive peace.
President Rinkevich, is that, what are the contours of a deal? What are we looking at? Or should we even be talking about a deal as opposed to stopping the fighting as the main priority?
Well, I think that we are not even close to any kind of real discussion about the deal. We have the idea that we need to have a political process. But I think that at this point, what we see is that we have been always talking that Ukraine needs to sit at the table, but the problem is that Russia is not willing to sit at the table. And I think that last night's statement from President Trump shows that I think everyone starts to realize that without Russia acknowledging that it must sit at the table and start talking, there is not going to be any process. But when it comes to the strategy, I still believe that before we are going to start any political process, we will go through not the hard, not the easy way, but the usual way. What we will be going to see is Russians continuing to advance, and then it's a big question for us. Then we need to continue to support Ukraine with military assistance, with economic, with financial assistance, put sanctions. But I also believe that finally, if we really want to make a change, we must make a decision to transfer those 300 billion euros that are frozen in Russian assets to Ukraine. I think in that case, we would solve support for Ukraine. That would be a very clear message to Russia, and that also would show the way how we can force Russia sitting at the table. What would be the mechanics of the agreement? Well, that's a big question, but I think that before we start talking about that, there are at least two principles that we need to take into account. Ukraine must play a major role in this, and Europe should be part of this discussion.
Minister Barrot, we've heard about the importance of Europe still maintaining its support and indeed increasing its support, and President Zelensky had some pretty pointed remarks on that. Is the onus, having heard quite strong words from President Trump, is there also a lot of pressure now on European leaders? I'm thinking even of getting over the objections of Prime Minister Orban to extending the sanctions, which would otherwise expire next week. I mean, there's plenty for Europe to do here.
Absolutely, and if Europe has supported the heroic Ukrainian resistance over 3 years now, this is because the fight of the Ukrainians is bigger than themselves. It's about Ukrainian territorial integrity, but it's also about European security and about international law. And because Europe cares about its own security, about international law, it has been the #1 financial partner of Ukraine for the past 3 years. And since we're speaking about the Russian frozen assets, it's taken a historic decision by the EU to impose sanctions and to seize the proceeds from the Russian frozen assets to build up a loan with G7 partners, $50 billion, that is going to help the Ukrainians face their liquidity needs for the months to come. But that's just one part of our support that needs to keep building up until the moment when our Ukrainian friends will decide that the time is ripe to enter in negotiations. Our responsibility and the only strategy, the only sort of possible strategy for us is to give them the strongest possible hands when this decision when the negotiation will start. Everyone has to play its role. The US have to put the pressure on Russia and increase the cost of Russia to continue waging its war of aggression. The European partners of Ukraine need to provide them support to enter this negotiation with the strongest possible hand and to get ready to provide the security guarantees to ensure this peace will be lasting and that security of our continent will be preserved going forward.
Roberta Metsola, I just want to, we will get to the point of the security guarantees because it's obviously fundamental, but on this question of the pressure on Europe now, and specifically when we talk about we need to maintain the pressure, increase the pressure on President Putin, there's been a lot of criticism of the implementation of sanctions. There's now even a question mark about the continuation of sanctions. There's a lot to do.
I think the term "nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine" has never been more important, especially over the last hours with the statement of President Trump. And my next question would be, will this mean that those member states that have been perhaps more reluctant than others to continue pursuing sanctions on Russia will change course?
Sorry, do you think President Trump should give Viktor Orban a call? Is that all it's going to take?
Well, that's the first thought I had. Because if we are looking back and saying that the European Union has shown we can do this when things get really difficult, that the European Union has shown unprecedented unity, where it would otherwise have been impossible in the past years. And that unity was because there was a realization that Ukraine cannot fight this war with one hand tied behind its back. Secondly, that it is not in the EU's interest, and certainly neither in the United States' interest, that Russia controls Kiev. And that, as Jean-Noël just said, if we can send the strongest of messages that Ukraine being around the table, together with Europe, discussing what peace will look like. And peace is something that we need to discuss and what it means. And we cannot decide for Ukraine what peace means, is that unity we can keep and that strength of resolve as we enter a new phase of discussing with the new United States administration. So if that tweet was a launchpad for, let's say, a new course of how we discuss, then let's discuss. But nothing, again, about Ukraine without Ukraine, because otherwise we will not be doing either the European Union a favor, Ukraine a favor, and certainly neither the United States.
Minister Svidenko, we talk about Ukraine, and obviously there were some outside Ukraine who were surprised or intrigued to see the apparent support for a Trump victory in November, which was born out of a frustration with the European response to the support for Ukraine. So could you speak to how the economy is faring and what people are expecting of this new administration and the path in the next 6 to 12 months?
So I would say that because of the support from our partners and because of the resilience of Ukrainian business after the dramatic fall of our economy in 2022, we remember it perfectly well, 30% GDP fall. In 2023, we grew up by 5%. Last year, it's 3.6%. And this year, we expect growth as well. And if we would compare our economy with the Russian economy, so our economy is in a better shape. But it does not mean that we can stop. So we need to strengthen sanction policy. I absolutely agree with you. And I think that when the, let's say, peace discussions will take place, we should be as stronger as possible, and Russia should be as weaker as possible as well. Otherwise, there won't be a fair discussion or fair negotiations. I think there is a big expectation from population and from business side that this year will end the active phase of war. But what is more important, and I want to emphasize on this, there is like our result. It's not just peace itself, but it should be sustainable peace, and it should be guarantees, and we should be absolutely sure, together with Europe, that that potential possible settlement will prevail Putin and will prevail him to restart and to invade again. That's why I think that we should be focused on guarantees during this stage, on strengthening of our economy, and of course sanctions, because, and also I had a discussion with business here in Davos, and I told them very openly that those companies that are still working in Russia need to exit from Russian market, because actually it has not less effect than sanction policy itself.
Sikorski, we've had a clear shift in Washington, and everyone's trying to work out what it means. There has been a shift in recent months in the balance of fighting on the battlefield. What we've heard here is very similar, with respect to the panelists, very similar things to what we've heard in the past from different parts of the European leadership. Does there need to be a shift coming from Europe in response to Donald Trump, but also in response to the situation on the ground?
I think in Europe we are doing the right thing. As the minister said, the loan on the basis of frozen Russian assets and other types of assistance that we're giving to Ukraine should suffice for this year. There's been a spike in deliveries to Ukraine. Ukraine has the means to resist for this year, which Putin should take into account. Poland is doing what is our duty. We're the presidency of the EU right now. We hope to open one negotiating cluster to do with rule of law, and hopefully another one to do with Europe's external policy. And remember that security guarantees for one another in the European treaties are much more specific, actually, than in the NATO treaty.
Just to follow up on that, Minister Barrot, President Zelensky talked about 200,000 peacekeepers this week here in Davos. Do you think that's about right? Where are they going to come from?
Well, my view is that the 21st century probably started on February 24th of 2022. With the end of the era of the peace dividends, people have to get used to the idea that we're going to permanently need to spend more and to do better in terms of protecting our own security. And the first rendezvous, the first moment when this question is going to be asked is the enforcement of any peace agreement that will be struck, that will need to be consented by the Ukrainians, because there cannot be any just and durable peace that would imply a capitulation by the Ukrainians, but that will be guaranteed one way or another by international partners, and including, of course, European countries. These are discussions that we've been having internally in dedicated forums in order to try and start thinking about what such security guarantees might look like. But more generally, what I think the public should realize is that we're not going back to the pre-February 24 era, and that we're going to start doing much more to ensure the security in our neighborhood.
But just on that specific, when are the budgets going to reflect that? Because if you can understand why President Zelensky would say, look, the US is the only one that has to be a fundamental part of these forces, because we don't see European governments seriously recognising the things that you've just talked, this 21st century that you've recognised. Several governments haven't even been able to pass a budget, let alone start seriously increasing their defence spending. So do you understand why people just think it's not credible to be saying what you're saying?
I think that Europe has clearly said that it had realised this when in the strategic agenda that our leaders adopted last June, when President von der Leyen gave her speech in front of the Parliament, there was a clear analysis of the fact that we need to do more. But once we realize that, we need to act, and we need to find a way to fund such extra efforts in terms of security and defense. This might mean some reshuffling of our priorities at the European level, and security is for any continent and any country priority number one. It also means activating or leveraging the ability of the European Union to finance such a build-up in security and defense. There have been proposals of activating once again the financing lever of the European Union to build up our ability to defend ourselves. President Macron has proposed a doubling of the European budget to reflect the new priorities, and security is one of them. Adaptation to climate change is another one of them. But clearly, we'll have to think hard about how we fund this new ambition that we have to have for our own security.
Well, there's thinking hard, but there's ideas from President Macron, but none of which have been accepted by some key other players around the table. Roberta, Metsola.
I think you are right in saying we have a big mismatch between what citizens fear most, and this shows the way they vote, whether they vote or not in election results, and what elected representatives tend to deliver. It has become more popular in national parliaments today to say, you know what, we cannot spend this much on defence as is being asked for us because we need to spend it on infrastructure. But that mismatch comes with the fact that our citizens at the same time tell us, but we need to feel safe. And it is not only citizens, people in countries that are bordering Ukraine. It is also in countries that are further and that would, under any normal circumstances, exonerate themselves from responsibility. So how are we going to bridge that and understand the frustration? Essentially, what I felt also from President Zelensky this week was frustration. Like, how many times am I going to come here? You're going to tell me we stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes, and then I go away with either delayed implementation. Yes, some countries help me more than others, but some countries say they're going to help me and then they don't. So on a European level, we have, because we have the mandate, because security is at the top of our priorities, we have the possibility to do more. And let's not forget, 3 years ago, I would not have thought Finland and Sweden would be NATO members. 3 years ago, I would not have thought that you'd have more national parliaments than I ever expected discussing potential reinstatement of obligatory military service. This is, you know, a continent that has seen tyranny but over a generation ago. Let's not forget that. So I think it's, you know, we talk about the next months, year as being crucial, as being an eye-opener, but we cannot divest security from what it means to live in Europe. We cannot divest feeling safe and our citizens actually being, let's say, content with what their governments are doing if they feel that there's a danger that is close by. And again, I go back to what I said in the first time I spoke, is that it is in no one's interest for us to see capitulation. Not in Ukraine's, not in the EU, and not in the United States. We talk a lot about spending. How much have we spent? How much more do we need to spend? If you compare $175 billion for the United States, 136 billion euros for the EU, the expenditure was done. The contribution was done. We just were sometimes too slow, sometimes not coherent, sometimes not agile enough. But if there's anything that we've learned is that if we don't do that, then we will be squeezed out from the table, both politically and militarily. And I don't think that we can afford.
Minister Sabir, I'm just wondering, listening to this, and obviously we also heard your Mr. Zelensky's comments this week, the frustration that we've also heard reflected here. What are you coming away from Davos feeling? Do you feel that he's right in a sense to say, look, the US is the only we don't know how President Trump's going to behave, but at least we know the US has a serious response and is a serious power here?
You see, we value all the assistance, all the aid from our allies. European and Ukrainian security is indivisible. That's important to understand. And also, I would like to point out one very important issue. Ukraine is not losing. In February, we will mark 3 years of this brutal Russian aggression. Probably a few people believe that Ukraine could prevail 3 years ago. Yes, maybe at that stage, we should expect more decisive decisions. And probably we should not be in such a situation in which we are now. Yes, we are not in the strongest position now. That's true. That's why it is so important to fulfill this concept, peace through strength. And we have clear understanding of this concept and of the elements of this concept which could strengthen our positions right now. The outcome, from my humble opinion, the outcome of this war will shape a new global security order. And this will be a very unstable and dangerous world if Russia is rewarded for its aggression. It is inappropriate to put aggressor Russia on one dimension with Ukraine, which fighting for its independence. So on the contrary, if this war ends in a just way, with respect for Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity and security, the world will be safer. That's why it is also very important not to manipulate with the meaning of the term peace. Just comprehensive, long-lasting peace.
President Rinkiewicz, I'm interested in your response to that and the defense that Ukraine is not losing, but there's a very strong feeling that it's not winning, and as was admitted, it's certainly in a weaker position than it was.
Yes, and I think that then we need to come back a little bit to the history. Let's remember that we started quite well at the beginning of the war. Sanctions, military support, but then somehow we went to self-imposed red lines. We were talking a lot about the strategy. The current strategy that I'm hearing from time to time is we are going to support and we will support Ukraine as long as it takes. At the same time, we actually had to look at the strategy for Ukraine winning. Now we are in a situation where we are discussing the just peace. And here I very much agree with the Foreign Minister of Ukraine when he talks that now the meaning is that long and just peace means Ukraine being strong, because let's face it, I can't imagine, with all the history with Russia violating all the international agreements from Budapest Memorandum onwards, that if Ukraine is left without strong military support, without strong security guarantees, like it or not, but the only real security guarantee is NATO membership. We are divided in NATO, we have different opinions. I don't know how we are going to discuss this issue in the upcoming NATO summit in The Hague, but I see that we still have many NATO members that are very doubtful, and I don't see very good way forward, at least for the time being. So from that point of view, that's a kind of pessimistic point of view. The optimistic, well, this is the third year when Ukraine is fighting, and it keeps fighting. And with all the support, it will be strong. So if we continue pressing Russia, if we continue supporting Ukraine, then most probably we will be coming to some kind of agreement we can support. But then there is a next question, how we can contain Russia afterwards. And we can contain Russia afterwards only through strong Ukraine, militarily, economically, part of the European Union definitely, and second, yes, through not lifting sanctions or economic pressure on Russia after that deal is there. But I think we are now, and I myself, I was cautioning to run ahead of time, but we still need to also get a new strategy in place for us as well.
But the US has to be central to but Radoslaw Sikorski, one thing that from the first administration, Trump administration, from everything we've seen so far, the sort of the most optimistic approach comes from accepting he likes to do deals and he likes to announce peace, and many people have said he wants peace. The downside is perhaps that if he does a deal, he's going to want to lift sanctions, he's going to want to potentially remove all pressure from President Putin and Russia, even though many in Europe would still think he posed a serious threat. So I just wondered...
Well, that's speculation. What has actually happened is that the President of the United States has issued an ultimatum to Putin. Make terms of ending this war or else. And as I read Putin, he has a tendency to overplay his hand. And this is a moment to come to a deal, or the United States, President Trump is hinting, will get tougher. We're in a better place than we were 48 hours ago. And let's also remember that when Russia loses a war, historically, in the past, every time, after the Crimean War, after the Russo-Japanese War, after being knocked out of World War I, after losing in Afghanistan, after losing the Cold War, there are always reforms. So Ukraine winning this is important not just for Ukraine and for the European security architecture, but also for Russia and its people.
But at the same time, as Russia is being given the ultimatum, put under pressure potentially, we see a broadening and a very kind of clear broadening of Russia's antagonism against the West. Only yesterday, we had the UK Defence Minister announcing the aggressive moves of the Russian ship in the Channel. We've had much discussion around the Baltic and the cables. So, at the same time as this is happening, Putin is threatening Europe on a wider front and in potentially in a much more open way. Well,
of course. Putin is repeating the mistakes of Soviet leadership. The Soviet Union took on the West and lost. He himself is on the record saying that under Brezhnev, the Soviet Union overspent on the military and bankrupted the country. And he was very insistent that this mistake should not be repeated. And he's doing exactly that. Russia has taken on all of Europe, has antagonized countries that were previously friendly or neutral, Nordic countries, the place where the Russians were keeping their money, the UK. Hybrid war doesn't mean just being a nuisance on the internet. Hybrid war means cyber attacks, means arsons, means assassinations, means hostile actions in the Baltic Sea, in the English Channel, and so on. We have it all the time. And we need to take action. I've closed down a Russian consulate in Poland. We've reduced the area where Russian diplomats may travel to make it more difficult for them to service their agents. Our security services have agreed that the Russians who are trying to destroy the European Union should not benefit from the privileges of the Schengen area. So when you have a Russian diplomat in one EU country, they should be able to travel only in that EU country and not all over Europe, servicing agents perhaps in another country. These are very practical things that we can do to limit their capacity to do damage.
Minister Barrot, I just want to follow up on what I was saying about the Russia and what Minister Sikorski has just said. That is part of this effort to build European public support for this war, but also the broader effort it involves. Speaking more about the many-layered aggression that we're now seeing from Russia, for the grey war, if you like.
Yes, indeed. And I agree with everything Radek just said. And if I referred earlier on with a perhaps provocative comment on the beginning of the 21st century, this is precisely because despite of all that happened, including in Ukraine with Russia, something radical happened on February of 2022. It is a fundamental mutation of the threat, a threat that has morphed into a full-scale invasion, with then Vladimir Putin internationalizing this war into Asia, and then weaponizing information, weaponizing migration against Poland, weaponizing energy prices, like he's been doing against Moldova and other countries in Europe, meaning that the threat has crossed a new threshold that requires from our end a new posture in terms of security for our continent. And this needs to be very clearly explained, because there is no going back to earlier years when the threat did not cross such a threshold. And this needs to be understood in Europe, but this also needs to be understood in the US. And I agree with what Radek said. Recent comments by representatives of the incoming administration tend to suggest that there is an understanding now in Washington that there is no possible bad deal for Ukraine that would at the same time be a good deal for Europe and the US.
Just to supplement what I said, because the confrontation with Russia has already melted the main, but it also goes beyond our continent. As we speak, there is an air bridge of Russian equipment from Syria to their bases in Libya. In Africa, Russia is engaging in a classic colonial exercise of sending mercenaries and soldiers and using despoiled African raw materials and wealth to extend Russia's influence in Africa. The southern tier of the European Union is, of course, affected by this. We should not permit Russia to capture permanently bases in Africa and to be able to do what they do on the Polish-Belarusian border, which is to switch on and off huge migration flows so as to try to enable politically the far right in the European Union, so as to destroy the European Union through the political process, because that's the objective.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions, and I know that there will be lots. Just if you could keep them brief, and I'll be looking for the rising intonation at the end of a sentence that involves a question. Okay, here first.
John Shipman, Executive Chairman of the IISS. I wanted, with a rising question, to provide in 3 sentences the legal justification for seizing Russian state assets. And it is, and we've produced a 30-page paper with lawyers from 9 different countries that supports this. It is basically this, that there is total agreement that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was illegal. When there is a peremptory breach of international law, it is open to states holding assets of that state to seize them in order to help the invader to comply with his legal obligation to pay reparations to the invaded state. This is not something without precedent. When, after Iraq invaded Kuwait, Iraqi assets were seized to support Kuwait, not a poor country, in order to be able to repair the damages on the oil terminals that were destroyed by Saddam Hussein. So my rising intonation question is, could the European Union not agree that the French, the Germans, and others in Europe could offer this? Because Mr. Trump's next tweet could be, I will not use American money to support Ukraine, I will use Russian money.
So a very quick response.
Well, I support it. I know that some colleagues are concerned about the effect that this would have on the euro currency. But I think a slight devaluation of the euro would be good for various economies, for France in particular.
I'll bring this home, if you allow me. Let's see how I'm welcome back in Paris.
Careful.
So I understand the argument. I wouldn't use it in this way if I was in the team of those that support this solution, because the financing needs of Ukraine for this year, they're covered by the G7 era loan. So what is it about when we talk about seizing the assets themselves? To me, it is mostly a way to bargain with Russia when the moment will come for negotiation peace, which again we think is the moment that the Ukrainians will decide. So it's less for me a question of funding liquidity needs for 2025 that seem to be covered in large part due to the European efforts, than a question of building up the strong position that we want Ukrainians to enter with into the negotiation talks. And for that, we have, of course, the sanctions, and we're discussing the 16th package of sanctions under the Polish presidency of the EU. We have the military support at the bilateral level that is going to keep building up throughout the year. And we have this Euro-Atlantic integration that some of us mentioned earlier that is also putting Ukraine in a strong position as when they decide to start the peace negotiations.
I just wanted to add, I mean, don't underestimate the decision that the G7 took on using windfall profits. That has never been done. We also thought for many years that would not be possible. We were presented with a legal after legal opinion saying, don't do this, your banks will refuse, this will set a precedent, this will give larger economies power over smaller ones. But we found ourselves in a situation where, what else can we do? Yes, sanction packages are being adopted. We also need to be honest with ourselves. There are still many loopholes in the packages that have been adopted already. So we would be on the side of let's also get our act together and making sure that if there are, with countries that say that they are implementing them, in essence, some of them are not. And I think it would be also time for us to come together and say, what have we done so far? What has not worked, but also what has worked in order for us to become more agile when it comes to taking decisions with allowing and helping Ukraine around that table if peace negotiations take place.
Okay, there was one, yeah, here. We'll take these two.
Thank you very much. I'm a journalist from Chinese media, Cai Xin. My question is mainly for the Deputy Prime Minister. Yeah, today we have talked a lot about the negotiation, potential ceasefire, and lots of conditions, but I would want to bring the attention to the economic rebuilding of your country. So can you share with some of the current blueprint and the pathway that if we can really have the ceasefire within this year, and how should Ukraine and how should other countries, including EU members or even the broader world, to contribute to the economic rebuilding plan in your society? And the second question is that we know that the participation of the Ukraine into EU is involves lots of the political calculation. But besides the formal recognition of a member of the EU membership, I think Ukrainian people would like to seek much stronger and broader social ties with the rest part of Europe, and it should not be seized or should not be weakened even after the war. So what would be your call for the European population about their future relationship with the people of Ukraine?
That is a very good question. We're just going to take two together because we're going to run out of time.
Hi, this is Iqbal Dhaliwal from MIT. So my question is, given Trump's negotiating style and the domestic distractions in France and Germany, what leverage does Europe really have to ensure that its stakes are there in the negotiation? Like, why does this not become Trump negotiating with Putin, Ukraine a little bit involved, but the rest of Europe completely cut off despite its stakes? So what leverage do you have to ensure that that happens?
Okay, we'll have a moment on reconstruction before we
get so I probably would answer the first question. So I do believe that it would be inflow of foreign investment and a boost of activity of foreign companies and enlarge development of Ukrainian companies in case we would be sure that we would have the guarantees. I mean, now we have, of course, we are very grateful for Ukraine facility for this pillar 2 that actually help us to provide the European Commission providing guarantees and private companies can step in Ukrainian market. But we understand that if we speak about the reconstruction in the broader sense, we would need to have guarantees. I would look at this like from business perspective. business during Davos forum discussed with me, what can you offer to us? I mean, they're not asking for risk insurance because it's already in place. So we have risk insurance from EBRD, from DFC, from MIGA. So they're asking what there can be guarantees for business. And of course, we understand perfectly well that NATO is like naturally the best option, and like our president admitted yesterday, the cheapest one. But we understand that probably we should look at other solutions as well in parallel. And today, during the Ukrainian breakfast, I made an example on the seaports. So when at the beginning of the large-scale invasion, our ports have been fully blocked. And there was a deal brokered by UN, Turkey and Russia. Then Russia sabotaged this deal. And then there was an option for us how to restart the activity, how to actually bring business back and open export. And I would say that the answer was anti-missile system in place. So that's why business also asking about very concrete things, and why what are their arguments for NATO. They are looking not for the I would say papers for some legal documents, but they are looking for the military infrastructure in place that can really protect their business in Ukraine. So that's why I think that this guarantee is a prerequisite for the reconstruction, because I would say other infrastructure are already in place, and in terms of reforms, we keep working as well.
President Rinkevich, do you want to respond briefly to that? I mean, there is clearly a risk that any negotiation that happens, or at least a good part of the way forward for Ukraine, will be mapped through Truth Social posts and phone calls between Donald Trump and President Putin.
Well, but I think that the answer how Europe can be relevant is actually given already almost by each and every panelist. Number one, keep supporting Ukraine. If you are the player supporting of Ukraine, I think that everyone should take this into account. Sending all the military aid, also financial, economic support, and I know that there is ongoing discussion who does more, EU or the United States. Actually, the figures I'm seeing still show that actually the European Union is providing totally more support to Ukraine in all fields. So that's number one. Number two, I think that, yes, we will need to have a very close contacts with US administration. We have to be, let's say, visible and present also in Washington when it comes to all those discussions. Leaders of EU member states, parliamentarians, everyone. There is no other way around.
But if President, I mean, as Radoslaw Sikorski pointed out, you have an or else threat in that post. In order to be part of this, the European also has to have an or else and has to be doing that. Whether it's, I mean, what are the tools that you could turn to? We've talked about the assets, but is it sanctioning of third country banks? Is it further energy sanctions?
Yes. You know, but here actually, I'm the former foreign minister for almost 12 years, so I know how all those Foreign Affairs Council discussions sometimes happen, and I'm sure nothing has changed since I've left almost 2 years ago. Look, we do have still issues that we have to address. Secondary sanctions when it comes to the EU sanctions. We don't have those. US have. Number two, we do have the situation which we need to address because loopholes involve third countries. Exports to some countries have doubled, tripled, or even, I don't know, have become 10 times. And then we still have also things that we need to address. For instance, we have started sanctioning Russian shadow fleet. But look at the figures. I was watching EU 79, UK 110, US 180 something. And from that point of view, yes, if Europe wants to be a player, then apart from having all those nice discussions, also real decisions must be taken. But I also know what it takes to get all 27 to agree.
But,
that's not an easy.
You know that, but we've got two of them on the end there.
That's their job, actually.
Can we get you two to agree? And will that be will this agenda be a priority for the Polish presidency? The deepening of the sanctions, following the US, and providing a European or else to this pressure on Russia.
Well, I hope that the government of Hungary has read the message from the President of the United States.
But that's just about maintaining
and that we
what we
pass the sanctions, and then we have another package, and yes, we need to close loopholes. The US has it easier because it's a unitary state. We are a confederation. Of course, it's more difficult for us to have the kind of practical instruments of sanctions enforcement that they have at the Treasury Department, where thousands of people work on this. We need to devote more resources to actually affecting our sanctions. I agree with that. But there are positive things that we could still do. The money, as you were saying earlier, for European defense has to come from somewhere, either from increased contributions by the member states, or from EU funds, or from debt. I don't think we want to pay more, but we certainly could make own resources of the EU bigger to service the COVID-era loans and also to address a new emergency, which is defense. We also have huge amounts of money squirreled away from unspent programs, including from the money that member states have not spent from the COVID recovery funds. There are some low-hanging fruits as regards money.
Minister Barrot, I'm just thinking specifically on the low-hanging fruits. The people who have to be persuaded to pick it, among other things, are the Germans. We had the current Chancellor here in Davos and also the quite likely future Chancellor. Have you been talking to them about that?
Well, what we've seen over this past year is a lot of opening up to finding innovating means of financing. Yes, we have on the eastern flank, on the Nordic flank of our union, including Germany, where our colleague from the outgoing administration, Annalena Baerbock, has been very forthcoming with the idea that at some point to overcome the debt break in Germany, some innovative EU funding might be needed given the level of the challenges in terms of security that are ahead. But I just want to respond to the European leverage question that was asked by the MIT professor earlier today. What we're saying is that there is no discussion about Ukraine that can happen without the Ukrainians, and no discussion about European security without the Europeans. Why? Well, because suppose, and I don't think this is going to happen, that there would be a discussion between the US administration and Vladimir Putin. Any deal that might be struck would have to be agreed upon by the Ukrainians that have been fighting for 3 years for their territorial integrity and for our security. And then it will have to be agreed upon by Europeans. We'll have to play the first role in terms of delivering the security guarantees to enforce such a deal. Otherwise, who will do it? Is it NATO? So far, the US administration has not shown to be super open for a short-term accession of Ukraine to NATO, which means that there is a transitory period where security guarantees will need to be provided in some alternative way in connection with NATO. The 200,000 troops that President Zelensky mentioned yesterday here in Davos, is it the US that is going to provide them? Here is the leverage.
But who else is going to provide them then?
This is not the point. The point is that the question was about European leverage, and what the Europe wants is a just and sustainable peace. We think that the US can play a very important role in reaching this peace by putting maximum pressure on Vladimir Putin, that so far has demonstrated zero intention to negotiate a just and durable peace. The responsibility of Europeans at large, including Ukrainians, will be to enforce such a deal. And that's why they need to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Look, if you're trying to prove that the US has a stronger hand on this than we do, It's obvious. For them, it's a war of choice. For us, it's a war of necessity. Not to mention Ukraine, of course. And on the money, just look at the alignment of opinions on debt or on the assets. Finland and the Netherlands have traditionally been frugal countries. Yeah. And yet, on this, they are gun-ho.
Okay. We've run out of time, and we probably could go for another hour, but I appreciate the lively conversation we've had, and I would say I'm glad that we have been able to focus on Ukraine for this hour, if not necessarily for all of this week. But thank you to all the speakers, and thank you for everyone here.
So.